Hi beautiful people, it's Amy from Savor, Salvage Scent, and I hope this finds you feeling great. I thought today I would do a quick review and experience video about my purchasing and using my First Serge Lutens fragrance. So if you're interested in learning more, I hope you'll stay connected and subscribe and ask me any questions you might have. Or provide information if you have additional information. So thanks for the exchange. So I'm sure for a lot of you who are perfume aficionados, Serge Lutens is not a new name. I've read about him for years and years and years. And I'll get to in a little bit about why it's taken me so long, of 30 years of perfume collecting, why this is new for me now. But so, Serge Lutens is of French descent. He is, I think, about 75, 80. And my understanding is he was in kind of the beauty business and kind of kicked off this floral line, I think in 2000, or this perfume line, sorry, in 2000, and works with a nose, if not multiple noses. The nose for this perfume is Christopher Sheldrake, and in doing a little research about him, I saw that if he doesn't create all of the Serge Lutens lines, he certainly creates a lot of it. So a lot of popular perfumes, Ambre Sultan, Borneo 1834, Chergui, and the list goes on and on and on. I think there were like, gosh, I think 25 or 30 cents. So, but he's also worked with other companies, including Shiseido, Chanel. I saw that he designed Coco Noir, which is a stunner, Rochas Tocadilly, and many more. So interesting record. So why don't I tell you a little bit about what I learned about the notes and my experience with the scent, and as I'm doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about why it took me so long to get here, or why I'm right on time. Who knows? It's all relative, right? So the top notes of the scent, this is the bottle, by the way. Now, my understanding is, so this was first created in 2001. So early in his game, right? And my understanding is this is, if not, I think it's a second kind of bottle design. And relatively recently, this bottle design changed. It used to have like a white, more kind of, I would say, minimal design. Still kind of minimal, a little more modern, I would say now. His scents range from, in my experience, you can find things used or partial on the Bay or other online formats for as inexpensively as $30, up to, if you're buying a brand new bottle, or his more expensive creations or lines, they go up into the, I think, 300 and 500s. So quite a range. I found this on, I love FragranceNet, I must say. And I think I ended up paying about high 50s, 60, something like that. So a tremendous buy for this. I think normally it's like 150, I want to say, new, 160, something like that. And the reason I started with this scent, I am an avid gardener. My parents were both, more my father, were really into gardening. My father more out of, I would say, necessity. Like, when I was growing up, we lived on a production farm, or a larger farm, kind of run by another family that focused on cows. But my father had a smaller, I would call almost like a smaller family farm. Like, it was really, I mean, to feed our family. So I grew up outside, working in gardens a lot. And my mom was into more like flower gardening, and then she had friends that were like deeply into it. So I grew up loving it. And when I was in high school, I kind of I started creating my own garden in my brother's yard, and my punk ass at the time was kind of neglectful. And then over the years, I've learned more and more and became more engaged in community gardens. And I would say almost every year it's like a new experiment. But now that I've been a homeowner for about 5 or 6 years, really getting deeply into and experimenting. And a few years ago, I've known about moonflowers. So my understanding is, so Datura, this, I don't know if I didn't say it yet, that this is a scent called Datura Noir. And in case you're not familiar, I wasn't familiar with that name. Many people might know the name Moonflower, which I believe is in the same family. And as far as Datura Noir, it's also called Angels or Devil's Trumpet. I think it's called like, God, Devil's Weed, Brugmansia, Hell's Bells. Like it's got I feel like a million names. And it's kind of like a flower of tale and myth. And some of them are true. So some of the tales are true. It is a gorgeous flower. I am going to post a few pictures. I'm going to create a link at the bottom of this page and post some pictures. I learned about moonflowers, these big, beautiful white, in this case, not always white, but in this case, they were big, beautiful white flowers that bloom at night. And I experienced them in a few people's yard, and their scent is just like crazy intoxicating. So heady, so beautiful. And then I decided to actually try to grow Datura Noir, which I believe is kind of like sister plant, or the Angel's Trumpet. I was at an artist's house who's a friend, a distant friend, for an event, and he and his wonderful wife had this whole garden of them. I mean, like, they were incredible. And it's interesting when, in addition to this big, beautiful white flower, and you might be familiar with the flower, finally one day I was kind of like, why does this look familiar? And I'm pretty sure George O'Keeffe painted them, but they look like almost like giant stars. And then they get these really interesting seed pod that kind of looks like it'll hurt ya. It looks like Velcro, but it's like sharp. It has little nodules, and then if you break it open, out come the seeds. So I was at this event, and this wonderful person said to me, oh my gosh, it's so easy to get the seeds. Let me get you an envelope full. And I was like, ooh-wee. So the first thing I planted, in addition, like the first thing in my annual garden that I planted when I moved into my home is these Datura Noir seeds. And they're very hard in the beginning, I think, to propagate. Like, you have to do things like either soak them a little overnight or soak them in kind of a towel. They don't want to always just break out of their seeds. So I did that, and they're kind of slow growing at first, to the point where I was like, I don't think this is going to work. And then, ooh boy, about a month later, the plant pops up, and then they grow. They just take off. So again, I'll show you some photos, but once I grew this in my yard and I just became obsessed, and I was like, I had heard about Serge Lutens for years, and I was like, I have to get this Datura Noir fragrance to see if it compares. And I will say, Datura Noir, Angel's Trumpet, Moonflower, these are not flowers that can be distilled through, I believe, a water or a effleurage, an oil kind of distillation process. There are some flowers that if you try to do that to them, essentially, it's going to break them down. Like, they will not release their oil or scent that way. So what people call the scent that's created in their stead or in their likeness is like a fantasy fragrance or an accord. It's perhaps a combination of other things to create what feels or smells like that scent. So this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the top, mid, and base notes, but part of the reason it took me so long to get to Serge Lutens, frankly, is I started out collecting vintage perfumes, and honestly, I started really young. And so in addition to vintage perfumes, I was buying what was really inexpensive. The cool thing, I love Dita Von Teese, the model who wears vintage, and she has been quoted a few times as saying part of the reason she really got into vintage clothes in the beginning is because she could get these, like she could get these clothes of incredible quality that would be like maybe a 10th or a 50th of the price if she were to actually purchase like haute couture. And that's the way I feel about many vintage perfumes. Especially when I was like in my late teens or early 20s, I could purchase a vintage perfume that, to me, to find something comparable in modern age would be $100 to up into hundreds to thousands, right? And I was just so impressed with the quality. Not always, but often, you know, that you could do this, and it made me feel like $1,000,000. And so for years, it was really about what was super affordable for me. And because I knew early on that this was going to be my thing, and that sometimes more is more, you know, to really collect and to refine my nose, I knew that I wanted to create a collection and have a few many on hand to really understand a range, or almost have like a library of scent. So therefore, I knew if I started into Serge Lutens, that was going to be a more expensive endeavor. So it's taken me a long time to get here. I'm still trying to do this super affordably, as referenced with this, finding it at, I think again, I paid like high 50s, low 60s. So tremendous deal. But you know, I'm going to have to do this slowly over time. And the reason I started with this is because of the fact that I had experienced the flower and I found it so intoxicating. So let me tell you a little bit more about the notes and kind of my impressions. And again, I would love to hear from you on your experiences. So the top notes are mandarin peel and lemon blossom. The heart notes are osmanthus, heliotrope, tuberose, vanilla, coconut, and apricot. And the base notes are myrrh, bitter almond, tonka, and musk. So I've read for years that Serge Lutens fragrances are not, and I love this, I was excited about this, they're not necessarily easy scents. Often they're shape shifters over time. They're complex. If I were to relate it, let's say, to wine, this would not be perhaps a bright young Chardonnay, but might be something much, much more complex and deeper and hard to kind of maybe wrap your arms around. That excited me. It was also, I think, what made me kind of late to the game too, though. It was like I had to kind of be ready for this. But I'll say I was kind of excited to see some of these notes because they are more, I would say, some of them more accessible. And but I would say this fragrance is a wonderful surprise and full of complexity. And I'll kind of tell you why I think that. I expected when I first smelled this, so good. I expected this to smell exactly like the flower, and it is darn close. Like the flower, I think there's this maybe complexity, juxtaposition. Let me tell you what I think, and maybe you can even help me nail down this vocabulary. First of all, and again, I keep referring to painting or novels, but I think it works in this way as far as, you know, perfumery and how to describe it. But this is much more than what's at the surface. So, and the flower too, it's like when you first experience it, it's heady, and heady to the point of almost decay. And for me, I love scents that are floral or are fruity, or I like foods that are fruity or sensual, like baked goods, fruits that almost, they're so ripe, they're right on the edge of turning. And, you know, wines are kind of like that from what I understand, that sometimes at their peak, they're so good, but in a couple days or the next day, it's going to turn right into rot, basically. And that's kind of the way I feel about this and Moonflower and Angel's Trumpet. It's so heady that it's fruity, it's rich, and you're right on the edge of, in this case for Datura Noir, the plant toxicity. So for those of you who don't know, and this is why I think we don't see the plant a lot, I think people in other countries sometimes grow it more, but here I've only seen it in a few people's gardens, and often with warning. So here's why. The flower is crazy toxic. Like, and I think that's part of the reason it's called things like Hell's Bells or Angel's or Devil's Trumpet. My understanding is if ingested, especially the seeds, the oil, things like that, that it's like it could kill you. And I've even read where there are certain, plants, botanies, flowers that cause, let's say, hallucinatory experiences. There's a list of those, and because of my interest in fragrance and everything chemical, weirdly, I've read about like different plants that you can kind of, frankly, trip on or hallucinate. And it's interesting because I've seen this plant on that list, but always I've read right along with that, don't dare try it. Like, this is not a joke. For those who successfully can like experience this hallucinatory state, or kind of a drugged or a different mind state with this without dying, perhaps you might not come back from. And or actually I saw a great quote. I'm going to see if I can find it here. It was described as, you might, if you safely tread and come back, what you're going to experience for quite a while if you come back is a psychotic madness. And that's what I've read is like, don't dare try it. The few people who have are like really skilled in doing this kind of thing. And it's supposed to be, again, like just crazy toxic. So I noticed when I grew it in my yard that even animals, like I have deer almost every day. They sleep in the yard sometimes. I have groundhogs, I have squirrels, chipmunks. Occasionally there's a fox. They eat almost everything. I mean, I spray and I try to do things to protect the plants, but it's like they have a recognition that this stuff is toxic and to be left alone. And so nobody messed with those plants. It was very interesting. And certainly if there were kids around, or if I had a family, it would definitely be protected and or, with great caution, right? So I think this scent is so interesting because when I read things like that it was very tuberose heavy, I expected like this tuberosey floral thing that I kind of experienced in the flower. But like the flower, again, there's this complexity. And so here's what I get when I first spray it. Okay, so this is Drydown wrist that I sprayed earlier today, and this is the wrist. I'm gonna do a fresh spray to give you an idea of the difference between the two. Oh gosh, okay. Hoo-wee, man, gosh. This is one of those where it's like a freaking masterpiece, and to me, and I love this. It's just incredible. At first, again, this is so heady. It is amazing. I mean, I definitely think it's a scent that some people would smell on you immediately and be like, wow, you smell good. But it's like, and I've heard people say this about like Tom Ford's Black and Velvet Orchid and some of his scents, that it's so ripe or funky that it almost, again, it almost is starting to get into that decay thing. And for me, what really stands out, I expected tuberose to stand out, and that's true. Like, you definitely get tuberose. For you tuberose lovers, I think this is a really good one. However, what's really wild is in the beginning you get a lot of fruit, and you get, for me, that bitter almond to me comes through strong as cherry. Like, this is, I'm really getting at a cherry sense, and so I thought this was like weirdly timed, because I was like, this to me is like a really cherryish scent. And the apricot that comes through smells like a combination to me between like apricot and peach. So it's like this ripe fruit with flower. And what's wild to me is in a few hours, within like an hour or two. And this lasts, I would say it only lasts about 4 or 5 hours on my skin, which I think is a short term for Serge Lutens. I've heard that some of the other ones like Amber Sultan and the others, that they are like last a long time. But this one, it's surprising for how bright and heady this starts, how gentle and soft it becomes. And so after it dries down, what really comes out for me is the vanilla. Like, and vanilla's in a note, but all these things kind of create this thing that smells like vanilla. So probably the tonka, the coconut. And so to me, it's often people call this like an oriental floral. And to me, I would call it a floral vanilla when it dries down. So it dries down to floral, vanilla, and powder, like a really soft, nice powder. So to me, they're almost like different scents as they dry down. And I like that. I'm up for that. I love a little bit of shape shifting. And I think it's this like, these two faces or two personalities that almost makes this, I would call this like a gothic perfume. And I think the reason I would call it gothic, again, I think about like gothic artists, you know, gothic novelists. So, you know, something like Frankenstein or Toni Morrison's Beloved, I would call gothic in some ways. And for me, gothic like deals with like love, loss, decay, and almost like a spiritualism or a drive gone wrong. Something that borders on beauty and the grotesque, something that borders on life and decay. And like, if you know this flower and you get down with the scent, to me, that's what's so cool about it, is like, I think people who like tuberose enough just alone, who aren't maybe into super complex scents, could like this enough because it's got those elements. But I think for somebody who's up for a challenge too and likes more complex scents, I think this is not your average floral. I've read that some people are surprised because they expect really challenging scents by Serge Lutens, often very strong or with even unknown elements that people can't wrap their head around. This isn't quite that, but I think it's the fact that it's got almost two minds about it, to me, makes it almost like I would again call it a gothic perfume. So really, really interesting. And then it has this beautiful, it like soothes out after a few hours. And it's just both, I would say, experiences are incredible. And it just makes me, of course, realize that what I was afraid of is going to come true. I'm going to have to acquire more of these scents. It's just going to take some time. And I look forward to this. I love the thought of like slowly getting to know these. And I thought, because I started with Datura Noir, that I might approach some of his other scents or their other scents the same way, where perhaps I try to even maybe grow certain elements or obtain certain elements in the notes so I can really get a good feel for and get a story for. So that's my first experience with Serge Lutens. I know so many of you probably are like, this is not new information for me, or you're probably into collecting his work already. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from everybody. I would love to hear from people who have not experienced his work, to hear like, are you interested in him? Have you heard about him or his line and the nose? What do you think you might start with if you haven't purchased his fragrances yet? And then those of you who are into collecting his work already, I would really dig knowing like, what are your favorites? Do you agree that even though Datura Noir is known by some people as like a not as challenging Lutens scent, that it's still challenging? Do you think there's such a thing as gothic fragrances? Am I crazy? So anyways, would love to hear from you about him and any other lines that you're really interested in hearing more about. So thanks so much for listening. Cheers to wonderful, complex perfumes, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.